And so to start it off, we're going to have Renee Crane, an Arctic Research Support and Logistics Manager coming from NSF, the National Science Foundation, and also the team lead for the Field Operations Community of Practice, to give us a couple updates for our deliverables, as well as some of the priorities that we're trying to meet with the field operations team. Go ahead, Renee.
Thank you, Sarah. Go ahead. So yeah, some of you know me. I'm Renee Crane. I'm at the National Science Foundation in the Arctic Sciences section. And David Allen and I are the co-chairs for the Field Operations Community of Practice. And as we're kicking off activities for this year, this annual cycle of IARPC, I just wanted to touch on a few parts of our work plan and things we've agreed to do for the year. And we hope that you will all be on this journey with us and help contribute to the deliverables and other activities we have. So some main objectives of the field operations collaboration, sorry, I have to get out of the old language of IARPC. We are a community of practice. It's a self-forming group to share information among agencies and people who have field work, basically, as part of their portfolio or their research activities. So our role is to help coordinate among federal agencies supporting field work, especially when we have large field campaigns or using expensive assets like icebreakers. This is a place where we can potentially leverage those things. And also we want to share information among researchers and communities about research before, during, and after the field expeditions have happened, and to increase our engagement with communities in particular. I've highlighted on the right-hand side of the slide the specific parts of the implementation plan of the Arctic Research Plan that our group is working on. So to coordinate interdisciplinary observations, to communicate about field activities with communities, to promote and support good practices for improving diversity and inclusion, and to engage communities and Indigenous people. So those are places where we intersect with the implementation plan. Especially a lot of field work has to do with observations and contributing information to research and working with communities. Go ahead, Sarah. Our deliverables that we're working on, we have been producing the research vessel matrix annually, going back to, I think, 2016. That will be going live in May, and it's something that we update monthly if there are any changes in cruise plans. We'll be adding mooring locations, and that's something we're going to talk about more today. Thank you, Bob Picard. We also started last year hosting pre-field season and post-field season meetings of planned marine-based cruises as an opportunity to share information among the research community, and hopefully to have engagement from community members to learn more, have an opportunity to understand what research is planned, ask questions, express concerns. And then the post-field season meeting is a follow-up to that. And I think in the last year, we recognize it can be really helpful to researchers to hear from each other. What did they observe? What did they experience? It's an early chance to see what the data is showing and talk about where outreach efforts people did to work with communities, communicate their research cruises in real time or in other efforts. So those were really interesting. There's a good webpage on the IARPC portal where you can see the recordings from last year, and you can read a little bit about the cruises, and we'll be producing a similar page for this upcoming, the 2023 season. And Sarah, just so you know, we're seeing your screen share, not just the document share, but and then also we want to share good information among each other about good field practices. Today we'll talk a little bit about safe and inclusive field environments. So you can go ahead. And as anyone has ideas or things they want to talk about that are relevant to other agencies or to field work, we can always include other good practices. So Sarah, did I already tell your story, Sarah? Talk about what you were going to talk about? Sorry. Sarah will talk in more detail about the creative ways in which we are going about the pre and post field season meeting. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, so as Renee said, we've been putting together this vessel matrix. And so I'm going to give a little bit of a lowdown on where we are with the vessel matrix this year, and kind of relate that back to the pre and post field season meetings that are coming up. And so if we could have in the chat, if anyone wants to add, how many different research expeditions do you think we have covered in the vessel matrix this year? I know some of you have been looking at it, maybe some more closely than others, but I'm curious to see if we have any estimates. Let's scroll down. 30. Yeah, so 30 is a pretty good estimate. Anyone else? Oh, okay, we're getting some consensus here. 20. Awesome. Yeah, so before I reveal our number for the year so far, just a brief intro into the research vessel matrix. So the goals of this matrix is to really coordinate and collaborate research and outreach activities. We want to share with communities information on what vessels are where and how to contact them directly, and really increase awareness about vessels to prevent any potential issues with scientists and communities, and increase communication channels. So starting last year, we transitioned this matrix to just a spreadsheet to more of a web page on the IRARPIC site. I believe that it's been posted on AUS's site in the past as well. And the transition really incorporated images of the research vessels, the map, and some more plain language about what sort of activities will be taking place during this. And so in the past year, we've had over 2,115 page views with over 1,000 unique, almost 2,000 unique viewers. So we're getting quite a far reach. This year, I've had a couple of people ask a little bit more about the bounds around the data that we're collecting. And so I just want to be really clear that this is an inclusive activity. We are including Alaskan waters, and as well as north of the Arctic Circle. And we're including activities such as research, mapping, and surveys. Really, if you're on a scientific investigation on a ship in Alaskan or Arctic waters, we really want to know what's going on and be able to communicate that out to communities. So some of you who had guessed 40 or 30 or 20, it's a couple more than was estimated. We have about 49 different expeditions going on 23 different vessels. And so the majority of the expeditions are departing between May through August. As you can see here, we have a couple going out in March, a pretty big increase in May, and then that trails down throughout the summer and into the fall. As kind of a representative, it's usually taking about 25 days until reaching the final port. So the majority of these cruises are spending some time at least doing research within the Gulf of Alaska, with roughly 42% happening in the Gulf of Alaska, lesser so in the Bering Sea, and then the smallest number of research cruises that we were able to capture in our vessel matrix happening in North Atlantic Ocean. And of course, this is representative based off of our data that we've been able to collect, and we're always looking to span our reach and collect as much information as possible. So our goal with collecting all this information is to communicate it out. And so some of the ways in which we're communicating are through websites and events, newsletters and subscriptions, direct emails to community groups and leaders, listservs, and social media. And so in the picture on the right-hand side here, what I'm trying to show is one of the newsletters emails that you'll get if you sign up for the subscription. So if folks haven't yet signed up and want to, I can add that in, or I guess David just did it for us. So, so that's one way to stay up to date with the information that we're collecting. And this really feeds into the pre and post field season meetings. And the pre-field season meeting will be coming up in May, on May 25th. And so we'll be using a slightly different format this year, with breakout groups, and also trying to increase interaction and communications with Indigenous communities, providing a platform for invited speakers, and sharing some of our research needs as well. And then the post-field season meeting, we are aiming to perhaps set this up in collaboration with AMSS in January. And so again, as Renee said, the Research Festival Matrix will be going live in early May. And really, this is a byproduct of all the information that you all are providing us as researchers and PIs, and even early career folks. And so we just really want to thank you for your collaboration. It takes a lot to be able to put this all together, and we would not be able to do it without you all volunteering your time and your information, and looking for ways in which we can collaborate. I'll take any questions now. If there's anyone who has any questions or comments before we move to our next speaker. Yeah, Karen, I see your hand up.
Yeah, this is a great resource for us the science community. I think it's fantastic. I'm a little worried that if we go around saying we have 40 expeditions, that the local communities in the Arctic are going to freak out, because that sounds horrifying. But when you think about 17 of 40, it's like what, 7 on your matrix so far. And so maybe we should be careful about our messaging and not say we have 40 or whatever, because I don't want people being really concerned that we're going to swarm the shores of the Beaufort Sea or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important to maybe qualify that a bit, and what are fisheries surveys in the Gulf of Alaska that take place annually versus research cruises, things that come through the Bering Strait and that kind of thing. So I agree with you. I think we have to be careful, because we don't want to just try to make the number sound big for the sake of it, but it's a number that we can take a look at. We can look at the past. I think the Coast Guard's been putting together ship traffic numbers for some other activities, and I think we can start to put research in context of all shipping as well. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we're still in the process of building a community at this point. So I think a lot of the dramatic expansion that may possibly be perceived from presenting a greater number of expeditions is merely a reflection of detection, as well as diversifying the types of activities that we're actually capturing. And I agree that we'll have to present this information in a way that folks can appreciate that message. And I think there's probably other ways to cut it as well. Thanks for raising that, Karen.
Yeah, Seth, go ahead.
Yeah, this sort of gets to the question that I put in the chat as well. If a less than 1 day cruise counts, such as a small boat going out from shore to recover a glider, are we trying to track something like that, and does that count as a cruise? Either we're trying to count everything, or there's got to be some sort of cutoff. It could be good to have some sort of clarity on what we're trying to capture here.
Yeah, I think what's more important would be to catch the glider. I think what we're really interested in data collection sort of underway in some form. So it's less about the small boat going out to collect the glider, and maybe, or I guess I'm thinking more like a sail drone type of thing. Like, we're more interested in something like a sail drone is out versus like just the recovery effort to go pick it up or something. But I think that it's for this group to define what should be in the matrix. I don't know, Seth, if you have more to say about that, and then we can go to Danielle and Bob.
Yeah, no, thanks. I don't have anything more at the moment. I think it's a good discussion.
Go ahead, Danielle.
Thanks. Yeah, just something aspirational to think about. If there were someone with some technical expertise who was willing to spend some time on it, one way to think about the maps for the cruises would be to animate them so that you could animate the cruise plan. One thing we ran into with our integrated ecosystem research program was we were covering like the entire Chukchi shelf over an entire season. And when you put a map up with dots, it looked like we were everywhere all at once and going to make a huge impact on everyone in the region. But if you looked at what our cruise plan actually involved, is we might have been at a station near a community for maybe 12 hours on one day in the spring and one day in the fall or something like that. And if we had been able to animate our cruise track and how much time we plan to spend at each station, it would have been a much more realistic visualization of our anticipated footprint. So it's just something to think about. If you're able to do that, it might help things. Thanks.
Allison Gaylord, do you have anything to say about that? I know we're working on real-time ship tracking and some other things.
Yeah, I do. And we've launched the research cruise viewer for the NSF vessels, and you can view the planned routes. We've been basing the information on the data we could obtain from UNOS, but also more detailed information that's required for the environmental compliance pieces. So, I mean, I could just flash what's available real quick if you want to see it, or put a link in the chat. Yeah, the NSF vessels are in here, and you can click on them. You can get the near real-time AIS. You can search by year. Right now, the default will come in for what's planned for 2023. So there's 9 cruises in there right now for NSF.
Thanks for putting that link in the chat.
Sure.
Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So I was just struck by that there were only 3% of the cruises coming from the Atlantic side. And so I put in a chat, would you consider the Nordic Seas, which there's a fair number of work that's happening in Nordic Seas, which is of course north of the Arctic Circle. And then it just, in the Gulf of Alaska, that's not north of the Arctic Circles. That's really the subpolar North Pacific. And so are you going to conclude the subpolar North Atlantic? And that's going to open up a huge number of cruises. So I think needs to be some clarification. And also, if you are going to include the Nordic Seas, which I personally think is probably a good idea, maybe there's some entity that you can reach out to try to get an initial contact for all the cruises. Thanks.
Yeah, there's a marine planning tool for international cruises that we could potentially connect with. Our focus at the early stages has been cruises around that go through or pass through Alaskan waters. It was kind of the origin of the vessel matrix was actually in an Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission meeting where they said, we don't have any idea who's coming or who is operating a vessel if we see it offshore. And so I said, I'm sure we can pull together that information. And so it started in that way. And to the extent that it's useful to the research community or to coastal communities, I think that expanding it is possible now that we've built it.
But it's a good question. It's a good question for the group. If we're using this primarily as a communication tool between the research community as well as a deconfliction tool for coastal communities in Alaska, whether we would maintain a focus in the pre and post field season meeting on cruises in Alaskan water, and then have some other kind of coverage at other points during the year to talk about the broader research vessel traffic, or whether we'd present online comprehensive online tools for all of those cruises, and then maintain a focus on coastal communities. But again, we're at the point now where we're still building, and we rely on interactions like these with you all to sort of define. We have the opportunity to define what the future looks like now that we have these tools in place.
Any other comments or suggestions? I really appreciate, thinking about our footprint, and my intent was not to like boast about the numbers, but more to imagine how much of a footprint we have, and to be aware of that as a community together, as researchers, and also to be able to understand our role in that region, and coming in as guests, or and being respectful of all of the people that are living in those local communities as well. And so I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to Bob, who's also going to be talking about our awareness on mooring locations. And so Dr. Bob Pickart, senior scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. Go ahead, Bob, I'll let you take over.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Please change that slide so I can stop looking at that ugly mugshot. Okay, thanks. All right, so over the last couple of decades, there's been more and more mooring work that's being done in the Pacific Arctic. And here I show you an example. In 2013 and 14, just in the Chukchi Shelf alone, there were 20 moorings put out by 6 different institutions. So a lot of mooring work. So a few years back, I decided to try to make an effort to at least coordinate our activities. So we started a spreadsheet that's just, on a Google Drive that all the mooring PIs can access. And the intent was that every year they would update the sheet and put down where the mooring locations are. And that way, at least among the mooring community, we know where each other's moorings are, and hopefully that'll help them keep safe. But I'm pleased to say at this point that we're going to transition this over to IARPEC. And that's great for lots of reasons, including I hope it's going to be result in a more accurate spreadsheet, a more up-to-date spreadsheet, and also a spreadsheet that's more available to the international community, not just the group of PIs who actually do the mooring work. Okay, next slide. So the overall goal is to keep a publicly available list of all moorings presently deployed in the Bering, Chukchi, and Beaufort Seas. And it's key to keep this thing up to date. And I think it's also key to have it broadly available to the international community, so we're all aware. And my vision anyway is that every chief scientist on every cruise prior to sailing would download this spreadsheet and give it to the bridge, or give it to the captain or the navigator, or whatever, so that they know where all the moorings are. And at the very least, they'll steer clear of these moorings and keep them safe. Next slide. So here's an example. This is just a screenshot taken from the map server on the RV Sikuliak. And they have it set up so they can take the spreadsheet and just immediately upload it into map server. And then you see this beautiful graphic representation where all the moorings are. And that's really great for the bridge. And it's also really great for all the scientists who are accessing map server. So I know as we've talked about the initiation of this on IARPEC, there's talk about, putting this on RMAP or something, so to get some graphical representation as well as the spreadsheet, which I think is a really good idea. Next slide. Here are the details. So IARPEC will help facilitate the sharing of this mooring matrix and maintain an up-to-date copy on their website. IARPEC will share the editing access to a Google spreadsheet with a group of PIs who contribute to the mooring matrix. So only the mooring PIs are able to access this spreadsheet and to make changes, and they can do this at any time, including from the ship as they're doing their mooring work. And sort of as a backstop, or what you will here, twice a year, at the beginning and the end of each field season, IARPEC will reach out to the mooring community and just to make sure that all their information is up to date and accurate. And, I could easily envision, a mooring PI out there doing the work, they get caught up and they just forget to, report their information to the spreadsheet. So having this, twice a year reminder, it hopefully will help keep it up to date. Then during the field season, the matrix will be reviewed and updated on the website monthly as needed. So this point, I think, could generate a little bit of discussion here. For instance, I could envision that, mooring PIs out there, they get their moorings in the water, they want them to be safe. And the last time this thing was updated was, 3 days before their mooring work. So now they have to wait a whole nother month before their information is actually public. So I think we might want to have a little discussion about how to make that updated more often than once a month. One idea would be that the PIs could actually be able to, update it themselves. Another way that was probably safer is maybe provide an email contact so that each PI, as they do their work, they could email someone in IARPIC and they could update the website. So, because I'm just a little worried that once a month is not going to be often enough. But at the same time, of course, I'm sensitive to, not making it too much work for IARPIC in the same way that I'm sensitive not to make it too much work for the mooring PIs as well. And then lastly, and importantly, the IARPIC website will host the Excel version of the spreadsheet and not the editable Google Sheet itself. And that's important because we don't want people mucking up this spreadsheet who don't actually have moorings on it, because we want it, again, to have it as accurate as possible. Okay, next slide. So here's a snippet from the latest spreadsheet. This is just the first few lines of it. And I said that we want to keep this as simple as possible. And so this is sort of our first go at it, or this has been pretty much what we've had for the last few years. You can see the different columns, last updated, the institution, the PI or the point of contact, the email address of the PI, the name of the mooring of the program. This next column, intended deployment, that's really important. And I have to say that, prior to this talk, when I got on the website or onto the Google Drive and looked at the sheet, that was woefully not up to date. So that's really on it's something on the mooring PIs to really make sure that intended deployment period is up to date. I think what's happened is people have updated their mooring information and just forgot about that column. So again, this is only as good as the PIs providing the information, the accurate information. And then they put their latitude and longitude in degrees and minutes, and then that automatically creates this next couple lines, which are, just a decimal that long, which is great for plotting in your favorite software. And then there's the bottom depth and then the top float. And that's important operationally to know where your top float is. So in discussing with the folks at IARPIC about this, we thought about that there may be some need for some other columns. And one that immediately came up was a column that has a list of sensors on the mooring so that people know what's actually being measured. So if you have ideas about other columns, please share them. But we also, again, want to be careful that we don't make it too onerous for the mooring PI, like I don't think we want mooring diagrams on there, for instance, because that's just going to be too much work. Okay, next slide. So the benefits, the most obvious benefit is that it reduces the risk of damage to the moorings and also to the ships themselves. But it also facilitates sharing of ship resources for deployment and recovery. And it makes it easier to arrange emergency mooring operations. And it seems to me that happens every year. There's some type of emergency mooring operation. So it's really great if you know what ships are going to be where, servicing what moorings, so that you can reach out and try to get help if you need it. And then this last point is something that I think is really important. And it'll be neat to see where it goes. But I can envision that this will ultimately lead to interdisciplinary science collaborations. As an example of that, I'm just showing this slide here. This is again at the year 2013 and 14, when there were 20 moorings by 6 institutions. And that group of PIs from those institutions put together a couple of really nice studies using all of those mooring data. It was really a broad synthesis of the circulation and water mass transformation and stuff like that, considering the entire Chukchi Shelf. And even this map that I'm showing you here is really valuable. It shows the mean circulation across the entire shelf. You can see the strong flow through Bering Strait. You can see the flow around Hannah Shoal that feeds Barrow Canyon. You can see the flow that emanates from Central Channel that feeds Barrow Canyon. And then you can even see the Beaufort Shelf Break Jet. And then you can even see the Chukchi Slope Current as well. So that's just one example, and it's a disciplinary. It was all physical oceanography. So I can imagine that when a biologist sees where all these moorings are, they'll say, "Oh, well, gosh, there's a mooring right near where I'm doing my work. Let me contact the PI and see if we can learn from each other." And then ultimately, I think it could lead to the biologist sees there's mooring there, and hey, not only is it near my study area, but maybe I can get a some type of biological sensor on that mooring to help me with my research. And that kind of thing I know is done in Bering Strait, but I think it can be done at lots of moorings and lots of locations. So I'm hoping that not just operationally and the safety of the moorings, but this could lead to some really good interdisciplinary collaborative science. So that's all I got to say. And I think I saw earlier in this meeting here that this is going to try to go live in mid-May. So I'm leaning hard for those mooring PIs who are on the call. I'm leaning hard on you right now to update your information. And once we get that updated and we decide on what extra columns we have, then I'll work with Sarah and we'll get this thing live and we'll see how it goes. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Dave, go ahead.
Bob, first off, thanks so much for this. I know that there's so many things that all of you Arctic PIs do on behalf of the community, and this is just one example of all the different resources that are out there because of the goodwill and intent to collaborate that that folks in the field actually are doing. I wonder whether you didn't mention it, and I think we've discussed it briefly in a couple of our coordination discussions about this, and I wonder whether we could do a better job in presenting the mooring the mooring matrix, including information about the project that the moorings are, the overall project that the moorings are actually connected to, as well as either the location where you can find the data, because we get criticized by coastal communities regularly on not letting them know where the data actually are, or if it's easier and perhaps more tractable and maybe helps navigate some of the latency related issues, whether we could at least provide a contact for those data. Just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
So yes, David, we did talk about that. And those are all great suggestions, you know, and ultimately it would be super to have all information, you know, on some type of a spreadsheet. My only worry is that, you know, when you're doing things like where are the data and, you know, giving a description of your program, I want to make this as easy as possible operationally so that a mooring person can just get that information on there, you know, because I'm envisioning that, you know, a lot of this might be done from the vessel. Like using Rebecca again as an example, the second she's done with her Bering Strait moorings, she from the vessel blasts out the information. So she's not going to take the time at that point to say, okay, where's my last data set located? But she could do that ashore, and we all could do that ashore. So I'm grappling with that a little bit, David, you know, but the need to get it out there and not make it too difficult so that everyone will do it, and also the need to be complete.
That's a great point, and I agree. We can't make it too complicated. But I wonder whether we could also make certain elements. You know, since some of these mooring projects have been in the water for decades, maybe we don't need to worry so much about the. I presume that in many cases the data location may not be changing a great deal. So maybe we could make some of those pieces not necessary to update when we're updating locations, but I think there are many ways that we can realize efficiencies. I'll keep working with y'all offline.
Yeah, Seth.
So Bob, I had a suggestion for the spreadsheet on the new column that lists the sensor type. That's going to get pretty technical and pretty obtuse to a lot of people who might be just looking at this. And I wonder if instead of the sensor, because who really cares if it's a seabird or an RBR temperature instrument, how about just the parameters that are being measured, the basic parameters, temperature, salinity, acoustic backscatter, whatever it happens to be.
Yes, Seth, that was a misnomer, or that was a mistake on my part. It shouldn't have been the sensor. It should have been just what you said. It's the variable being measured. So you're right, temperature, salinity, you know, nitrate, whatever it is. So yes, we want to stay away from instruments and model numbers and all that stuff. Thank you.
Allison, go ahead.
I'd just like to applaud this effort. I think it's great. And also just to let you guys know that there's been quite a bit of work done on a spreadsheet of variables or elements to look at observing assets, which I'd be happy to forward over email for consideration. And it's been vetted recently by an international working group, the Sustaining Arctic Observing Networks Polar Observing Assets Working Group. And I know there's a balance between trying to get PIs to enter the very basic information about what they're planning to do in real time. But then if there's a way to incrementally go back after the season and fill in, tie that these moorings are associated with the Distributed Biological Observatory or whichever project or initiative. I think it's really important for tracking to do that. And also, as mentioned, where the data eventually is going to be going. So I'll share that over email after the meeting, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. And there's a couple more suggestions in the chat as well that we'll capture.
All right. Oh, Karen, do you have a comment?
It's not actually about a mooring, but just talking about when Bob was talking about the importance of us knowing where everybody else's moorings are, so we don't like do something dumb like try to catch it with a net or something. It reminded me of the fiber optic cable, and maybe we should try to, along with all this other information, provide a spreadsheet of the location, the geographic locations of that fiber optic cable that we need to not dredge up, that runs all around the coast of Alaska. So it's just, I hadn't heard anyone mention it in a long time, but it kind of goes along the same lines of don't screw around with the moorings. So
Yeah, Karen, thanks for raising it. It's just a really good point. And I actually thought about mentioning it in my talk. That's the good news about that is that's a one-time thing here that's not being updated every field season, unless they're going to extend it, of course. But it's certainly not as active as the mooring assets list. So that information is also critical, just like you said. You don't want to do a bottom grab where that cable is. And using the Sikuliak as an example, that's another thing that's in their map server. You just click on it and all of a sudden all those positions are there, so you know them. So that's definitely something that we should put probably in the same site as more of a static thing. Here are all these locations of the fiber optic.
be especially helpful for people who might be new to working in this region and hadn't heard about it, and we don't talk about it at all anymore. And I don't know whether, and I know Sikuliak has it in their map server, but the rest of us, just have to do it themselves. And so I think that'd be really important to keep here. Even it doesn't take any effort because there's no updating. It just has to be carried along with all the information.
Yep, good point.
Yeah, that may be something we can add to our map and other viewers that we control. All right, should we move on, Sarah?
So Ignatius Rigger from the University of Washington is and also a coordinator of the International Arctic buoy program, is just going to give us a brief update of some of the work they've been doing. Go ahead, Ignatius.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Good. Okay. Yeah, so just wanted to give a quick update on the Arctic buoy program. The U.S. funders are listed below with logos. Next slide. Yeah, and so this is what the array currently looks like as of a couple days ago. Lots of buoys through the high Arctic. We just deployed quite a few north of Alaska, and then there's still quite a few gaps, especially on the Russian side. We did get 8 buoys deployed by ARI last year, and there's 12 more that will hopefully show up. But that's an ending collaboration because of the war. Next slide. So this, just north of Alaska, are the 3 deployments that just happened. Dartmouth was out there deploying some seasonal ice mass balance buoys. This is Chris Poloshinsky. And then I see Ann Hill on the call. ASL deployed, the Arctic Submarine Lab deployed 3 ice balls that the US IABP contributed. And then out of Barrow, we deployed 13 buoys flying with the North Slope Burrow. Next slide. And so this is what the most recent deployments look like. About 8 plus 13, 21 buoys were deployed. Next slide. And then I'd like to highlight the North Slope burrows since they've been flying quite a bit for us. Although this looks like a tight array just north of Alaska, these things do disperse and spread out quite a bit. So most of the buoys further north along the 180 line, were deployed by last year's flight from the north, provided by the North Slope burrow. And then this was, this is something John Woods coordinated through Ice Paper. Next slide. And so our remaining plans for the summer, here are the flight lines. We fly up the 150 line quite a bit from basically Dead Horse to the ice edge. This is a USIBP and seasonal ice zone reconnaissance survey effort led by Jamie Morrison. And then we also have some plans to fly to the Makarov Basin. There's a lot of, besides the hole in the Arctic Buoy program, this is also a hole for oceanographic observations. And so we're hoping to deploy some auto floats along the line and possibly some micro sweats. This is all being pieced together right now. Also in July, related to Ice Paper, the Canadian Air Force will be deploying buoys in the 2 holes shown by the ovals. And then next slide. And then there's quite a few ships going into the Arctic. We've targeted a few for buoy deployments, mainly the Healy, because it's easy for me to load things on. I have a talk later with Shalane Reagan to flesh this out better. But the key spots are the Bering Sea. There's gaps there. We'll send some SVP buoys there. And then the Nabos cruise, it sounds like will be serviced by the Nabos area would be serviced by the Healy on its way back out of the Arctic. Earlier, there's a mention of icebreakers going into the Arctic from the Atlantic side. We'll be using the Polar Stern and a French tourist boat like Commandant Charcot, but there's a lot of other boats going in that I could probably add to the matrix pretty easily. And then another cruise I should probably mention is down in Baffin Bay. I think Bob Picard's looped in on this one. There's going to be a Coast Guard cruise on the Sycamore, which will probably send some SVPs or ice balls to also. Yeah, that's the quick update. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Thank you.
Ignatius, that's a lot of that information is available on the website, right? For people.
I need to update it. I've been a little lapse in updating it because plans are constantly changing and gelling. But yeah, I should. I'll put it up.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Ignatius, thanks for this presentation. I don't know. I know since part of your job is to maintain an evenly dispersed network of observations across the Arctic, and recognizing, of course, that you don't have the matrix available to you yet. But I know you're extremely well connected to everyone who's actually working in the Arctic. But I just wondered whether you see any opportunities or have any needs for relatively low impact deployments that may not divert vessels from their intended cruise track for 423. Whether there's any need at least for the vessels that to possibly ship devices up to their point of disembarkation or embarkation, excuse me, and possibly have them deployed opportunistically.
Yeah, we used quite a few of the cruises, the mooring cruises, like Bob Picard's and Seth's and sometimes Rebecca's, to deploy buoys. And so we have plans for the Iran to get buoys out, and most of the but to reach the like right now my main focus is to get instruments out to the Russian side. So that's where my main focus has been lately, just because it's it's a tough area to maintain the network in, mostly due to the winds blowing things away pretty quickly. But access is typically during summer but now that we're getting these flights into the area, you know, that's where a lot of our resources are going, is to get buoys on these flights.
Go ahead, Allison.
Thank you for the briefing. I know, Ignatius, you had an ambitious effort underway with the National Science Foundation's Arctic Data Center to create a buoy portal. And I was in touch with Wendy about the tremendous effort to, you know, go back through and get the archive of information, quality control checked and whatnot. And I was wondering if you could speak to that. Is that advancing? And then if so, will there be annual updates added to it, and how that might happen?
Yeah, right now, you know, our progress reports due, and we need to post the data on the Arctic Data Center. But we're happy to also put this on the AU's portal and anywhere else it can be used. Yeah, it's there's a few places where the data can be obtained, you know, whether it's the GTS or the various archives. But yeah, if there's, you know, we're happy to help get it in everywhere we can.
So there will be a central place, like a portal, basically from at the NSF ADC to pull from, of the quality control check.
There currently is one. It needs to be updated through 2022. Wendy's, my analyst, has that data set ready. I just need to review it, and then it'll be posted.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and the data is already available in real time on the IBP web server. And then I should also mention that we've been working with students on campus at the Human Center Design and Engineering grad students to redesign the webpage and make it more usable and friendly to people. They did a usability study last quarter, and now they're doing an implementation study as part of their coursework. So pretty soon we'll have hopefully a much better web page.
Great.
Frank?
Yeah, just along those lines, Ignatius, it might be helpful if in the design of that web page you try to see if the data can be machine readable, so they can just be harvested for these database applications rather than have to physically go in and get the data. So that would help Alice.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll make sure that's on the list. I know Wendy pulls from a few different websites, whether it's Cryospheric Innovations or some of our buoy Iridium service providers, using, I don't even know what the protocol is, but she just, you know, has some live links that just automatically pull the data down. And yeah, that's something we don't do, but we you know, with this next effort to update the website, I think it's something we can do, should do.
Okay, any other questions? Can email Ignatius, maybe you can put your email address into the chat. And so I want to turn over to Renee Crane to give some overview on some good field practices for us.
All right, go ahead. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about something that NSF is referring to as safe and inclusive field environments. I'll tell you a little bit more about what the National Science Foundation is working on, but I'm talking basically about harassment, bullying, and sexual harassment that often we know is a problem in field expeditions, and ways in which we as funding agencies or PIs, project leads, can eradicate these kinds of bad field experiences, bad behaviors, and worse. And there's a body of literature that I won't go through where we know that there have been research studies on the prevalence of harassment in biological and geoscience fieldwork. And we know we have enrollment issues in the geosciences. So there are a lot of things here, but we're really talking about supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion in fieldwork In our case, we're focused on the Arctic sciences. And we're talking about every type of diversity and equity and inclusion. So I'm open to discussion about all things, but I'll focus what I want to say about what NSF is working on and some good practices that we want to share. And I'm interested in hearing back from people, good practices that they've used on their projects or that their agencies have as well. And we can also build out this good practices portion of the field operations collaboration community of practice. So the premise is that fieldwork should be an enriching experience for everyone. That doesn't mean it should be easy or that it's going to be comfortable all the time. But it's really about empowering people to be successful in the field, and that if people are struggling, instead of isolating or bullying or harassing them, we want to mentor them more. We want to make sure people have enough information going into a field situation that they're likely to be successful. This is pointed to in the principles for conducting research in the Arctic that the IARPC agencies have signed off on. It's part of the very first principle there. And it's also a part of NSF's grant terms and conditions, and presumably most other agencies have this kind of approach built into their funding mechanisms as well. Some good practices that we know can be helpful are to have a code of conduct. And it's not a cover yourself, hey, we have something to point to as a code of conduct, but it's really about the organization or the leadership of the group or the institution setting the tone and being forthcoming about the expectations for behavior. And that's why IARPC adopted code of conduct for meetings as well, just so everybody's operating on the same assumptions of what's expected behavior. And that if someone's behavior is outside of those norms, you can point to that code of conduct as a basis for the expectations. It's important to have a mechanism for people to report if they observe or experience any type of harassment. We know that this can be an issue if somebody in that chain, the typical chain of communication, is part of the problem or doesn't respond and doesn't elevate the issue. So the idea is to have multiple ways in which people can report so that they can find a way to get information out or ask for help, or say, I've observed something or I've experienced something that doesn't seem right. This can mean that different people have access to the satellite phone, or that there's somebody at the home institution that can be reached out to. It's not reliant just on who's out in the field, for example. So different things to think about in terms of a chain of communication to allow people to say that something's not right. And mostly it's really about thinking through the particular scenario of field work that you're going to be in or you're supporting, and to think through what could happen and how people might respond. Working through what are possible scenarios and what would be reasonable ways to respond if somebody reported that there was something not right happening in the field. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Go ahead to the next slide. So right now, the National Science Foundation is doing a pilot effort and to require a supplementary document for proposals that have field work in the biological and geological or geosciences directorates. It's a plan for safe and inclusive field environment. So there's instructions in the new Arctic Research Opportunity Solicitation that was recently revised and re-released. And the 4 basic components of the plan for safe and inclusive field work are to describe the field setting and the challenges that the group might encounter based on the specific place that they're going to be working. Then to take steps to nurture an inclusive environment. That might mean ensuring there's a code of conduct, having some training ahead of time, establishing a culture of communication and inclusion. Then having that pathway of communication or multiple pathways so that if there is an issue, people know how to seek help. And make sure that there's an organizational response and that there's accountability and responsiveness. I think a lot of people don't come forward because they feel like they'll just end up embarrassed in the end and still have to interact with those people who are in their field of study or expertise. And if the institution doesn't take any action it doesn't encourage people to come forward with issues. So what NSF is asking for in these plans is think about where you're going. If you're going to be on an icebreaker, what are some of the cultural issues that you might want to think about? How might different groups of people be treated in the field, and how can we make sure that there's equity and inclusion for any of those groups? Go ahead. And then I think we have some people from the Arctic Research Support and Logistics Services contractor. Brian Hawkins is on here. I think Tom might also be, yeah. And Bevan Luna. So NSF has a research support and logistics contractor. It's Patel Arctic Research Operations. And as we move into this Arctic field season, we've worked together to come up with some approaches to more ways of emphasizing the importance of preventing and responding effectively to harassment in the field. And this is an example of one of the signs that will be put up at research stations or research hubs in our program. And NSF does a lot of reimbursable logistics support for other federal agencies as well. So we have, kind of a broad reach in the Arctic, and hopefully the approaches that are being taken will become pervasive. But the ideas are to treat a report of harassment as an emergency, to make sure that there's an independent or objective way to investigate an issue, make sure that there are multiple ways to report issues, and to do training or other preventative things ahead of time. So that's sort of thinking through it before you get to the field piece as well. So in our case, Patel has a third-party contractor who can take incoming reports. So if somebody's not comfortable reporting through that to their supervisor or through other chains of command, they can reach out to this third party. There will be third parties who can investigate issues if they arise. We know we have complicated mixtures of people in field teams. There can be contractors, people from different research institutions, undergraduates and PIs. And so every situation is going to be different and need to be handled in a unique way, given what the situation is and who's involved. But we want to just increase our tools and our having thought through it ahead of time preparedness, so that if something happens, we are able to respond more effectively and really go back to that general sense that we really want field work to be an enriching experience for everybody. And we aren't going to accept bad behavior from people. And that's definitely NSF's position. You can see it in a number of our policy documents. And I know that other agencies and organizations feel the same way. So hopefully we're just reinforcing and supporting each other in an effort to just prevent harassment and bullying and sexual harassment from occurring in field environments. I'm open to questions or suggestions or more discussion, and I'd really like to hear the ideas and efforts made by other organizations as well. And Brian and Tom, if you have more you want to add, by all means do. Go ahead, Dave.
Thanks so much for this presentation, Renee. I think it's a really important topic, and I appreciate NSF as always. Being a leader in this space. I wonder, similar to the actual vessel matrix, whether we want to either share these practices on someplace on IARPIC's page. You should take credit for your excellent work. Or do something so that people actually know what these best practices that are actually being deployed are. I know in my case in NOAA, what we typically do is, well, one, I've run into challenges particularly in contracting vessels, in trying to get the contract folks to make sure that we include those workplace expectations. So I've had to do quite a bit of research on how to leverage all the existing NOAA administrative orders that we can, in order to make sure that we can put the appropriate language in contractual language. And it would be really valuable to have a set of practices like like this to point to in terms of another agency sort of setting a bar. So just wanted to see where we wanted to go with this. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in the previous incarnation of Field Operations Group, we did have a place on our webpage where we had links to some good practices. We know Tulip Field Station in Alaska has an online Title IX training that everyone has to take before they go to the station, but people can see it or access it outside of that. Our contractor offers a number of training modules, and we can make them available. Yeah, well, as soon as we get online training, we can certainly make more online training available, but research groups that are sponsored by NSF can take the training. It's not mandatory, but it's another opportunity. And so I agree. I think maybe we should strategize more about building out what we share through the ARCUS page that could be applicable, or resources for other groups. Thank you. Go ahead. You're a co-chair. You don't have to raise your hand.
I know I should. No, I feel like we should follow. They're best practices. They're called best practices for a reason. So so I will follow the same protocol. One of the things that I've seen in NOAA since Sexual Harassment Prevention Month, among other things, is we have a set of cards, laminated cards that are attached to each other, that are primarily deployed for on-site and laboratory and cooperative institute staff, but that actually reminds people of those of all of the mandatory reporters, contact information, phone numbers, email, websites, etc., how to report anonymously, how to report attributed in an attributed fashion, but to get action, and that's in response to a variety of different experiences, including some instances where folks who should have been in a position, should have had full awareness of the fact that they were mandatory reporters, and all the different venues for reporting, who were not apparently aware of their responsibilities, and how to actually communicate issues, who ultimately didn't report issues of sexual harassment. So we're trying. That's one of the ways that we're trying to address that, at least for on-site. We'll have to figure out what that looks like for field staff, since sat phones and all kinds of other challenges come into play. But would love to see the resources that NSF is generating, so that we can all do better, and I like your word, eradicate these experiences for folks.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, the cards are a great suggestion, David, and I'm not sure that we focus as much on the responsibility on the cards we have now that are being deployed across the program. And I know this is like a really small image to see, but we also have cards as well. They're not as pretty as the sign that Renee has up, but it really is focused on getting the information out there on that third-party concerns intake system, so that we have all the ways you would normally think of: talk to your manager, talk to a coworker, but then that other way of getting those in so people can report, and it can be protected anonymously, and things of that nature. So we've got those going out on the program, just to give that detail.
Thanks. We can see it. That's good, actually.
Sorry, I was trying to hold it there, but I think that's a great suggestion, though, to emphasize not just the avenue, but the responsibility, right? So the folks that have the responsibility on our team and on other teams are focused on that, and don't forget that. I think it could be too easy to become passive at times, to not think of that responsibility. That's a great point of emphasis.
Yeah, and I think there's more of an emphasis on bystander training, and just that sense that sometimes you end up being party to something that's repellent, and you don't know how to respond, and so helping empower people to recognize. I love these questions that are on this one. Recognize, kind of ask yourself, like, what possible consequences are there to me? So how can I, and by having this third party way of reporting, we're trying to give people as many opportunities as they can to do what their internal compass is telling them they should do. And we do, like NSF has mandatory reporting. So if I hear of something, I do need to report it. I don't want that to ever become something that makes people reluctant to report, because it doesn't mean I'm reporting it to everyone. It means I'm carefully taking that information and I'm giving it to our Office of Equity and Civil Rights, who are trained in, protecting people's information and analyzing, how to pursue an investigation or take the next best steps in the situation. So it's mandatory reporting to the appropriate office to handle the situation. And I think the same is true in university context. It's mandatory reporting to the Title IX office, who has expertise in maintaining people's confidentiality. So I want that mandatory reporting can make people really sensitive to coming forward, but it's not mandatory reporting to the Washington Post. It's to, it's really being careful with that information, but not enabling people to just stifle it anymore, to smother those accusations, and so to take appropriate action and protect people's confidentiality to the greatest extent possible. So hopefully, as we talk about it more openly, we spread that information, and people become more comfortable reporting, and people become less comfortable acting like jerks in the field in whatever possible way you could imagine. There's also been some good, I don't know how relevant it is. I know it's a few years old, but there was the UNOL system put together some ship-based training as well. And if we were putting together resources on the website, we want to include that as well. Seth put a link in the chat to an interesting forthcoming article as well. Go ahead, Dave.
Hi, so I wanted to follow Sarah's lead and see whether we could bring some more folks into the discussion a little bit. And I wonder, since we have a mix of folks that have served in chief scientists and certainly cruise participant capacities, and I know that most, due to resources as well as generally the collaborative nature of Arctic research, a lot of you have worked in these multi-institutional and in some cases contractual arrangements. What experiences have you had in the field, and what resources do you think would be valuable for us as an interagency, and in some cases sponsors of cruises and other field work would be valuable for to sort of improve the dynamics in Arctic field work?
Go ahead,
I don't know
Bob.
who's driving, so go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, I'm not gonna say too much, David, but something that did just pop into my mind is as a cruise, is into planning stages, as particularly multi-institutional cruises, we tend to set up a series of meetings, and they're usually weekly or monthly, right? And we cover all topics of the cruise and the field work. So, might it be a great thing to have one meeting at some point for the cruise dedicated to this topic, and maybe have some type of an expert come in and lead the meeting, rather than the PI, and just really touch on all these topics. I think that could be a very effective venue for hitting the precise people that you need to be hitting prior to a field program.
I think that's a good point. And we offer a virtual, I think COVID forced us to develop virtual field safety training. And I encourage Bevan, if she wants to, she's still with us, to maybe talk about what would be the possibility of engaging just sort of a general field safety training on some, encouraging PIs to just invite somebody to come in and spend a little bit of time with the group talking about some of these topics. Do we still have Bevan? Okay.
Yeah, hi Renee.
Hey, Bevan.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, I think that is an excellent idea to have, even if it's a virtual option for training that's available for, pre-deployment planning. And I do think that we are working on quite a few programs now with LMS, learning management systems, to get those available. That would be an easy sort of way to just tie that in with all the pre-deployment planning. So I'll work with Brian on that and follow up on those options.
Yeah, and it, maybe something we can announce broadly through the community. It's, it would be hard to find everyone, but try to make people aware. If you're having weekly planning meetings, you could, we encourage you to get these topics into your planning, and we could facilitate a discussion or something like that. Or there's maybe online training modules that we are working on making available through the Patel ARO contract. And Bevan is the lead for health, safety, and environmental compliance under the Patel contract.
Nice to be here. Nice to meet all of you.
I was looking for my hand raise function, but I couldn't quite find it. But I just wanted to add in, I think a lot of the communication channels within programs that might be able to provide some of these resources to inclusive fieldwork and safety tend to communicate really well with PIs. And so just trying to increase the communication with, some of the participants or the earlier career scientists is always really important. I'm sure you guys are all aware of it. But I think it took me quite a long time in my graduate career before there were conversations about field practices that were directly brought into like the graduate program level. My own PI was having those conversations with me, but I think it's also important to nudge that within the graduate programs or the undergraduate programs as well, so that people are just aware of what the general expectations are, not just how to report, but what is the normal. Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yeah, sorry, just sorry for the formality. I really appreciate the point, Sarah, because I know that as a grad student in particular, you sort of you have this this is an amazing opportunity and just happy to be here kind of thing, but you don't necessarily, and I can say this is the same for me, for a variety of different experiences that I've had in the field. That I know people that have gotten in trouble, for instance, for trying to cross borders with hazardous materials and all kinds of other stuff. There's not a lot of training that you necessarily get. It's just it's focusing on the opportunity, and we do need to do a better job of communicating that there are workplace expectations, and that that other people, regardless of what institution they're from and regardless of their stature in the academic community or beyond, that they also have to, they're responsible to that bar as well. So I agree with you that that would be really valuable for us to share. And I'm seeing some agreement with in the chat here. Jill, I don't know if you wanted to offer any comments verbally as well, but you're more than welcome to do so if you like.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that I totally agree with Sarah that it takes a long time and it takes many trips out in the field sometimes to realize what, if you're new to the field, if you're a grad student or just new to being out in the field, what is actually not okay and when it's actually you should say something. So yeah, it took me a long time to feel comfortable also being a little bit more established in the field to be able to say something. So yeah, just being able to recognize earlier on, having a little bit more training for those early career scientists to know what is actually appropriate and what's not appropriate.
Thanks for that, Jill. Hey, Christina.
Hey, yeah. So going off of what Jill said, I think something that's important for early career folks, or when you all are thinking about these types of trainings for early career folks, is not just communicating that these things aren't okay, but somehow conveying that they can trust the system, which I think is really tricky and difficult. And I hope is something that you all are thinking about.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, I mentioned the word accountable, and I think that the response varies too much between, from organization to organization, and what I want to do is bring in some consistency and some clear expectations that how things will be handled if something happens within it's the only purview that I have any say over, and then to the extent that we can share good practices with others. But I meant to explicitly mention and encourage everyone to read the report that came out of the U.S. Antarctic program. My colleagues in the Antarctic down the hall here at NSF commissioned an in-depth study of harassment issues in the Antarctic program. The SAFR report, it's available online. It is a deep dive into some really horrible behaviors that have happened in the program. And I'm a real shed light on the problem. In order to develop appropriate solutions, you have to know what's really going on. And so I commend them for doing that study. It's hard to read in some places, and it really shines a light on things, and including the failure of institutions and organizations to take an active response or to take responsibility. And so I just, to the extent that any of us are empowered to make those changes within our organizations and to promote better practices to rebuild trust, that's what I'm working toward here. And we do have to look at what has happened in the past. We have to be honest with ourselves and recognize failures where there are failures. And that's why we wanted to build up in the Arctic program a more robust system for both prevention and for response. And for me too, just speaking about it openly. And even, being able to have that aha moment in your own mind of oh, I experienced something that was not, in hindsight, and I'm not going, here in the next time something like that happens or I observe it, I'm going to be able to handle it differently because, it's become more overtly that it's unacceptable, and that there are pathways to end that kind of thing in the field. And I don't think it's good I think we have to get out of that old explorer mentality of only the lead person has the knowledge, and they may deign to give that knowledge to the other people on the team. They're the expert, and they're the final say. And I don't think that's good practice. It's not the type of outdoor leadership that I think we should be imparting. I think we need to move away from PIs who think, oh, if I don't make them cry, then I haven't done enough to toughen them up in the field. And that kind of mentality I just don't think it has a place in modern scientific expedition. So that's that's my philosophy, and I want to get away from that. I want to really get to a place where people are empowered and everybody has training. Everybody would know how to use the rescue equipment. Everyone knows how to make a phone call on the satellite phone. And you're really training that next generation of people who are going to go on and train others. And so fieldwork's not comfortable, or it may not always be fun. I'm not saying that, but that's what the word enriching, it's what shouldn't be a struggle is feeling accepted, feeling healthy, feeling safe. Those are things that should be part of fieldwork, and you're there to learn the other skills. Go ahead, Dave. And then you can move on and move to wrap up, I think. Oh, Christina, unless you had anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, I'm happy to yield if others have something to say. I'm
All right, go ahead, Dave.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this, but I just would love to see, I don't know, people can hit the reactions buttons or something, but just to see whether you think it would be of value for an institution like IARPC, either in the monitoring, observing, modeling, and prediction foundational area, or the field operations community of practice, to share and actually promote, put their agency agency names behind sharing these kind of resources and expanding the resources that are available to folks who are planning and participating in field work in the Arctic. So I don't know if you're supportive, like, I don't know, hit your reactions button and hit the clap button or something. Oh, I see Danielle's already hit it. Oh, I see Brian. Okay. Oh, I see a hand raised from Gay. Are you saying yes, or are you saying, or are you raising your hand to say something?
Well, I'm sorry I came in late, but of course, yes. But my question is, did you guys define field work in the Arctic?
Yeah, I wish I
Because
could.
that when we're talking field work, it's easy to say field work, and I think all of you we all have a little view of what that may mean. That may mean I'm on a boat. That may mean I'm in a camp. When UAF talks to us, and this isn't about the topic of what you're talking on, but I think it's important to define what you're saying field work, because it's important in people's minds when they're thinking, especially young scientists. For UAF, when they come out here from the hubs of Anchorage and Fairbanks, they think they are in the field. And they're in Nome. They're in a region where there are people living all the time. And they're, again, it's like as if they're in the field. And so to me, it would really be helpful when we're in the Arctic and discuss, because the Antarctic is different, right? That is pretty controlled environment. And everyone is at a certain level, there's no, it's very controlled, and that's wonderful. And that's amazing, because that's the high science down there. And there's no, people issues or community issues other than the scientific community. So I would just say it would be helpful for me to hear what field work is defined as in the Arctic, but I'm totally supportive of the topic here, but I think it matters. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's important to understand what we're talking about, but I also think that when people are in communities, they are, I feel still the sense that what we mean is off campus, that we're out in an environment where our behavior affects others, where we need to take into account, the things that are listed in the principles for conducting research in the Arctic. So with the plan for safe and inclusive environments that NSF is requiring for proposals with, I'm saying the word field work because we really discussed a lot. We mean off campus. We mean people who have left the confines of where their university has clear purview over what's happening. There are on-campus police, there's campus security. We're talking about the behavior of people who have left that environment still needs to meet expectations.
Thank you. And I think it would be helpful to define that, because in this case, I am on a campus in Nome.
Yeah.
Kotzebue has a campus.
Right. Utqiagvik
has a campus.
There, is considered a remote campus.
And I think it would bring, no, it's a community campus. And I think it would be helpful for people's mindsets in the Arctic to realize that field work, which is kind of that exploration or explorer, we're heading out there, that you're not really going into the field unless the field is defined as you're 50 miles outside of a town or you're living in a tent or something. That would be considered field work. Coming to Nome and the Bering Strait region should not be considered field work unless you're on a boat or outside of a community by standards, because I hope that helps. I don't mean to be blabby here, but it is, for me, really, you see it when you live out here, and I've been to Antarctica several times, that explorer thing. And it was really interesting for me to see the difference between Antarctica and experience, and also then coming back, to my home here. And I just think that is something that would help if we define, it's not all what you think when you leave your campus, that should be defined as the field. We are not we are communities and hubs and vibrant.
Yeah.
If that helps.
So maybe, no, it does really help. And I always appreciate your perspectives, Gay, and really grounding us in the fact that my version of the field is somebody else's office, whether I'm on the Sikuliaq or the Healy or anything else.
Right.
Maybe what we need to get out of the habit of saying is defining between between field work and on quote unquote on campus work, and maybe we just need to think about it in terms of norms of behavior. This wherever we are, there are expectations for our behavior, whether we're in our house, whether we're in our office, whether we're you know, on a 400-foot icebreaker or in a plane or anything else, and rather than focusing on field versus anything else. So thanks for the comment.
That sounds great. And getting away from, if you are off campus and off a road system, you are in the wilderness. You are in a rough and tumble field environment.
No.
You know, that is rough for us to hear when you live here, for the citizenry, you know, like, oh, we're some sort of crazy place, or, you know, we don't have rules, or, you know,
I mean, look, I
just-
have to answer questions about whether people can take their children to their field sites. And I'm like, people raise families in the Arctic, but there's issues of liability and safety and other things that I still have to go through this checklist of approval, so someone can have a family member in the field, which might be a town. It's part of their field work, in the sense that they're going out to conduct research in that site. So I do hear what you're saying. I think that there's still some allowance for the fact that even if you're in a community, you may be conducting your research there, and so in our parlance, we're calling that field work. But I also recognize people live in the Arctic.
Well, would you say to somebody who's on a campus going out to rural Pennsylvania, you're going out into the field? I mean, what's the difference? Is it because you have to fly here? We have police, we have,
No,
you know, so it's interesting to me to hear you. It's interesting
if your study might be in Pittsburgh, it could still be field work if you're conducting interviews or taking measurements or something. So it's a parlance issue too, but I recognize what you're saying, you know, and that's part of that's why I'm here in my, you know, having lived in Alaska, bringing that knowledge here to my agency. People live and raise families in the Arctic. It's okay for children to be there. Brian's nodding because he knows we have one of these on deck right now.
Yeah, and the range of things, right? Just that range of work that's going on is so broad, and the range of settings with, you know, you might be on a research cruise with multiple organizations. I think Dr. Pickart mentioned that, as well as the vessel operator. You might have a helo support operator. You might be in a remote field camp with only 2 people. You might have a bear watch or a mountaineer. There's such a wide range of circumstances, and I think we also need to focus on or think through that Polar Code of Conduct that also speaks to interacting with indigenous communities, which we do a fair amount as well, which are certainly towns, and they have infrastructure, but we're still focused on our ethics and our code of conduct there. It's just a really broad topic, right? Wow, great discussion.
And I'm glad we have this group so we can share those perspectives and get to some place where we can see the Arctic from a different perspective. Sarah, what else do we need to do? I know we have actually gone past our time.
Not much. I just wanted to remind people that we are going to have a pre-field season meeting on May 25th, 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern. I believe that's 9 to 11 Alaska time. And so please join us for that. We can continue some of these conversations and hear about some of the plans for folks who will be out doing some research in the Alaska and Arctic waters. And I just wanted to give a big thank you to our presenters today, Renee, Bob Pickart, as well as Ignatius, and just everyone for your time and your discussion. This has been really rich, and I really appreciate everyone's engagement.